Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to welcome you to this summer's hackathon. My name is Alan Jones. I'm the Illuna Product Working Group Chair for Primo, and wanted to just use the summer as a way of getting everyone ready for their fall launches of the new UI. This particular hackathon is meant to be kind of a clinic where people will, if you've got questions as far as AngularJS, or you have questions as far as customizations, we've got a year under our belt, and just now that we have some experience, I think we've got the community in a place where we can start assisting folks who are having trouble. Anyway, this is meant to be a really, really basic orientation to AngularJS. It is not meant to be a class, but it's meant to talk a little bit about, or to give context to, when you hear the words directive, or you hear the word component, or you hear the word controller, your eyes don't basically glaze over. You kind of have a sense of what it is that we're talking about. This is also meant to be a hackathon to show people how to take their customization, put it into Primo Studio, and make it available to the public. So with that, I have Show&Tell from Max Liebers, who's going to be talking a little bit about the publication workflow for Primo Studio. That is, it's GitHub based, so it's web based, pretty easy. But we're trying to use this week as a beta test for the official launch that's going to happen in Prague for Primo Studio in August of 2018. So with that, I'm going to kind of kick into sharing my screen and getting started with some really, really basic AngularJS. And we're actually going to take an enhancement that was requested and show you how we might be able to do customization really, really simply with a little bit of code and a little bit of tweaking. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Hold on just a second. Chow, can you see that?
Yeah, you're good. You're good.
Okay. So I do want to talk a little bit about some business here. We are looking to have a couple of other hackathons in July and August. And really, this is meant to, the way to be thinking about these is these are clinics. This is basically to kind of help you move from the classic UI to the new UI, and to have an open forum as far as where your pain points are. This isn't a separate enhancement process, but it is useful to gather this feedback and figure out kind of where people are still having problems or where they want to customize. So this is something that the working group is working with. It's something that the interoperability working group is working with. And I want as much feedback as possible so that we can improve the process for everybody. Some rules, some really basic ground rules. This is the conversation is not meant to just end with this YouTube channel or this YouTube event. It's actually meant to go on for the entire week. There's a Slack channel with some of the emails that I've sent, and I'm sorry if I've annoyed anybody. You should have a join link in the Slack channel so that you can actually participate in the conversation. Post code. Don't just ask a question, but if you've got something that you're stuck with, feel free to use it as a platform where you can post code and get comments. It is a little intimidating at first, But the other thing is that we have a calendar of people, if you look in the YouTube description there, of people who are hanging out all week, whether it's Jeff Peterson from University of Minnesota or Mehmet, who's done many show and tells. Ulrich Leodolter is who did the last hackathon, is also participating in this. And we also have folks from Ex Libris, both Shaul and Gilad Wolf, who are going to be kind of tag teaming the week as well. So we may not necessarily be able to get to your question right away, but we're hoping that we'll be able to get to it within a business day. So really quick, and this is just meant to be a little 10 or 15 minute orientation. What are we talking about when we talk about AngularJS? And this should not be Primo.js. This is AngularJS and Primo. Because there is no Primo.js. But what AngularJS is it's a JavaScript framework that has a specific set of procedures that you can use to hook into components within the user interface. So some of those can be any of the sections within the UI. They can be any component on the single page web application. So unlike what used to happen with Primo's classic UI, in that particular instance, the browser would basically query the server, and you would have a whole bunch of server-side rendering of things. And from the server side, it was actually a very costly transaction. In part, the issue was that every page had to be re-rendered as HTML and sent back to your browser. One of the advantages about moving to the cloud was that we're actually able to take advantage of some newer technologies that actually render only individual components as they interact with the server, instead, or any other information source. The server doesn't actually have to do all of that transaction. So there was a win-win there in the transition from locally hosted to SaaS, in that we got to take advantage of other technologies that, while we could have used it within locally hosted, within SaaS it actually becomes much more powerful. All of this work is actually happening within the Primo development environment. Before you get started even doing any kind of customization, well, actually that's not true anymore with Primo Studio, you would have to set up your development environment, and I can refer you to some of the other Primo Hackathon videos for that. But setting up the dev environment is actually about a 4 or 5 step process. It's easy, it's quick, and the nice thing about this is that you can actually have the Primo interface running on your workstation, and you could be editing code and customizing right from your desktop. You don't have to edit any kind of files on a server. You don't have to do any kind of deploys. All of that, all of the guts of the Primo application are available on your desktop, so that you can actually override or do your customizations. Now, that said, the environment is truly a customization environment. You're not rewriting the entire interface. You're actually working with specific components and building services off of those components. One thing that I just want to say for VE customers, remember that when you do install the development environment, make sure that you use that -VE or --VE when you start up your development environment. Otherwise, things won't work the way you intend. So this is something that's specific for VE customers when they're running their development environment on their local workstation. And I've seen this question asked a number of times, that as people begin doing their customization work, they don't understand why things aren't working the way that they should be. That little VE signifier will actually set up your environment so that you can work with Primo VE. So a little bit about AngularJS. AngularJS is what's called a model view component, or a controller module model, where interface components are actually talking to data through a controller that is actually doing all of the business logic. When you hear the word directives, you can take advantage of specific Angular functionality, like showing something, hiding something, not building something if certain conditions exist, or building things if certain conditions exist, like the user is logged in or the user is not logged in. Or you can actually tie specific forms to form components to a specific data model for form processing using ng model. All of these different types of Angular directives are meant to leverage certain types of functionality. There are components then, basically are those types of directives that are tied through controllers to the data model. And within the Primo environment, you're going to see this in a second as I work through a demo, that functionality is broken down by component, by a controller, and you can connect to different types of data that are available within the Primo application. So one thing that Mehmet Selik had actually brought up that I think is actually worth thinking about, and we're actually going to go through two demos here today. One is taking a look at static or HTML templates, and the other is actually looking at dynamic components where an add-on is doing something. Maybe it's getting a record ID. Maybe it's interacting with the user. Maybe it's requesting data from another web service and changing its state based on what the feedback is from that web service. These two different types of add-ons are important because the simpler are the static add-ons. In that particular instance, you don't even need a controller. All you're basically using is a component. On the other hand, if you're actually wanting your add-on to do something, then you're probably looking at a dynamic add-on. So here's an example of a really simple component. In this particular instance, what we have is a component that has a template. The template is actually very easy. It's just showing to report a problem. Here's a component that's actually connected to a controller, similar type of thing. But if you see this directive here that says that the component is actually connected to a controller, there's another portion of JavaScript that's actually called in order to run specific functions to give this particular data or this particular template data to work with. So for example, where you see this function here called getRecordID, we're actually calling a function. That function is actually being called within the controller, and the controller is giving feedback that the component then fills in. This is what we mean by binding. Binding basically is passing data in and out of a component in a container that's notified by these two curly braces. Oops. Oops. Sorry about that. So in this particular folder, you're going to see that I have a custom module file, which basically starts, defines the new custom app, and defines a module so that everything that is within that folder will basically be either a component or a controller within this particular module. A single Angular module, and then the customization process will actually concatenate all of those components and controllers together into a single custom JS file that we can use and that we can see within our Primo view. So you'll see here's the code from the component that I was showing in the keynote slide. And within the link section, here's my piece of text. You'll notice that the link is www.google.com. The text is actually the text that we designated within the JavaScript itself. This is what a template is. A template is nothing more than taking a particular piece of HTML from this PRM service links after, and I'll show how to identify that area in a second, and substituting this template where we actually see this this directive. So the template then is just doing a substitution. When we start adding business logic to this, we have the model or information that's actually coming from the application, and the view, which is actually the interface components, actually bound together so that that functionality, so that we have a much more interactive type of component. So in that particular case, here we have our component again. This time I've substituted the link of www.google.com with a variable and a function You can see here, I set my context. I bind my function. Here's my function of finding my record ID. I bind that function to the current scope of the of where the controller is actually playing within the application. And then I have my two variables of the link text as well as the link string. Put all of that together. Oops. Hold on a second. Oops. That should be working. Oh. Helps if you actually uncomment out all of the code.
Alan?
Yeah.
I think if you use ng-href instead of href, it should work for you.
Hold on. I don't think I need to do that. See? No. There we go.
Okay.
So unfortunately, what I didn't do was I didn't add the binding or the controller that the component was calling. But that's, of course, what's going to happen in a live demo. So very simply, what we were able to do, hold on a second. I don't know if this is easier to see. We have our component. Our component is bound to the parent controller, which I'll get to in a second. We name our controller so that the business logic that's here will actually run when there are calls within the template. And when we do that, we actually get the record ID. A very simple example to how you can actually create a report a problem link within the interface. So how do we find these contexts? I think it's important to actually go through and talk a little bit, or to give an overview about how I actually found where the record ID actually was. So one of the things that you can do Within the custom.js file, hold on a second. Is you can set a breakpoint here. And this breakpoint will stop the rendering of the application at that particular point. And one of the nice things about the Chrome developer tools is that there's a contextual window here which will actually show you where this particular data is. And it's a very useful way of finding the specific element of data that you want. This piece of data gets filled into the query application or into the query string that we registered here. You see here I am looking up and returning that value. And that's how you actually find the value within the contexts of your script. It's very easy, but I figured that it would be useful to demonstrate so that people could actually find where and how you actually get this data for your JavaScript. So with that, we've got our add-on, we've got our code, we've got it nice and working, and it's pretty tight, very small. But what if I want to share this with the rest of the community? Well, what Shao's going to show is now that we actually have the now that we have this report a problem add-on, we're going to upload it into Primo Studio. Shao?
Yeah, thank you, Alan. All right, so let me just share my screen. 1 second. All right, here we go. And share. Okay. Am I good?
Yep.
All right. Okay, so my name is Shaud. I'm a developer for Ex Libris for the past 2.5 years, and for the past few months, I've been the guy developing Primo Studio. So I'm not gonna explain what Primo Studio is yet. It's better if you guys see it. But what I am gonna do right now is I'm gonna jump in and I'm gonna continue where Alan finished off. So once you use your development environment in order to create this component, so we basically want to import it into Primo Studio. So the first thing you can see on my screen here is this tutorial project we created, which basically goes through the steps of actually creating a Primo Studio add-on. So the first step, which Alan already did, was using the Primo dev-env in order to create this component. And there's a few restrictions on the component. So one of them right now, these things might change in the future as Primo Studio develops, but right now the template HTML needs to be inline, not in a separate file. And we're really creating one component. So thing is, Alan talked before about placing your component on specific hooks, specific preset hooks in the Primo UI. So we're going to call these Primo hooks from now on. So I think the one Alan used before was the PRM service details after, if I'm not mistaken.
It was service links after.
Sorry. So yeah. So Alan used the service links after hook. So when you're creating your add-on, you only want to use one hook per add-on. And there's a few other steps which I'm just going to go over right now. So once Alan created his component, he uploaded it to to GitHub repo, and let's just open that up. All right. So this is Alan's repo, and we should see his code in here. All right. Okay. So this is the code Alan finished off. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to download Alan's code. So let's go down here. Okay. So that's the first step. So now we have our code deployed in this folder over here. All right. So the first thing we need to do is open up the JavaScript folder. And right now there's two folders. So we have the custom module.js file, and we have the report a bug JavaScript file. So right now we can go ahead and remove the custom module.js because Primo Studio is going to create all of the model definitions for us. So we'll go ahead and delete that. Now we'll go ahead and open the report a bug JavaScript file. Okay, and we see Alan's code. Now,
Charles,
I'm going to be
it's really small, so you may want to make it. You want to make
it
really large.
Yeah. Okay, is that a little bit better?
Much better.
Do you need it any big? Okay. All right. So I'm going to be jumping back and forth between our tutorial document. So bear with me. Okay. So once we copied the folder into some location, so the first thing we did was we removed all JavaScript files except for the custom.js. In this case, it's not called custom.js, it's called reportabug.js. But that doesn't really matter at this point. The next step anyway is to rename that file. Just call it, well, we have to decide by which name we're gonna publish it in NPM. So let's just say we're gonna use report bug. That's gonna be our NPM ID. So let's rename the file reportbug.js. Okay. All right. Once again, let's get this a little bit bigger. All right. Okay. All right. Once we did this, we have to rename our Primo hook, which in this case is PRM service links after. So we're going to rename this hook over here. We're just going to call it by our NPM ID. So we're just going to call it report bug in this case. And since report bug is probably already taken, I'm just going to call this report bug Primo Studio, just to make sure that NPM ID isn't already taken. I'm going to rename this over here, and I'm going to do the same thing for the controller. So over here and over here. Okay. Okay, so once we rename this to our npm ID, it's really ready to be uploaded to npm and then published to Primo Studio. But I want to go one step forward, and I want to decide that when people install this add-on in Primo Studio, I want them to be able to customize the link text and the link base. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to inject a service called the npm ID in camel case concatenated to studio config. So I'm going to inject this service into our controller. Oops, sorry about that. And we're just going to change this thing to our npm ID. Okay. And let's call this over here config params. Okay. So what I did just now is inject a service, and it's in the context of this control, it's going to be called config params. And through this service, I'm going to obtain the various parameters which were configured by the user when he decided to install this add-on in Primo Studio. And I guess we'll see some of that a little bit later. So once I did that, now I can go ahead and write some functions. So let's say function get link text and then using config. And I'm just going to decide ahead of time that the key for the link text param is going to be called text. All right, I'm just going to return that. And we're going to create another function called get link base, and pretty much the same. Except this time we're going to obtain, let's call it the link base.
So just to be clear, Shao, then you're saying that for every value that you want to configure, you have to have a function that returns that value from the config file.
Well, you don't really have to have a function. I could have just written it in line. I could have just done this, I suppose, and that would work just fine. Sorry, yeah, only mistake I made is not supposed to be VM since this is not sitting on the context. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, but I just created a function just to make it look a little bit neater. It's not really necessary. And right now, and this one. Okay. So at this point, the link text and link base are customizable, and when we define the descriptor, which tells Primo Studio about this add-on and different options for it, we'll have to define these two keys, the text key and the link base key. But we'll go through that a little bit later. Okay, so at this point, I think we're ready to create an NPM repo for this thing. So we'll go back to here, and 1 second. And let's open the command prompt window. And I'm going to hit npm init. Now, what this command does, it creates a package.json file for me automatically. And the package.json file is basically a file which describes for NPM the name of this repo and what version it's at and a few other stuff about it. So let's do that. It's going to ask me a series of questions. Yeah, any time now?
This is where you campaign for a new computer?
Yeah. Well, we were saying the other day, it's a Microsoft product now, so okay, here we go. Okay, so the name of this repo is going to be report bug Primo Studio. Only difference is we don't want it camel case now, so I'm just gonna change it like so. Right, and that's going to be the npm ID. All right, version 1 sounds fine. Description, report a bug about a record in Primo UI. That's not important. Don't have any test commands. And at this point, I guess I could link this to Alan's GitHub repo, so I'm just going to do that. All right. And let's get this, and let's give Alan all the credit. There you go, Alan. And I think it was decided that for Primo Studio, we would be using the MIT license. So I'll just hit MIT. And this should give me now a summary of what my package.json file looks like. So we'll go over it, the name, version, description. All right, so it all looks in order. So let's hit yes. Okay. And what we can see is I created this package.json file right now. So now I'm ready to publish to NPM. So next thing I need to do is hit NPM publish. And it's going. Okay, so we're published. It's called Report Bug Primo Studio. All right, so at this point, let's jump back to the tutorial. And it says here, so step 4 was publishing to NPM. We just did that. And now in order to publish the add-on to Primo Studio, let's go into this link over here. Actually, I'm just going to go ahead and put this link on the Slack channel so everyone can see it. And this is the repo for the features.json file. So the features.json file is basically a file which lists for Primo Studio which add-ons are available, which hook they're sitting on, and what kind of configuration parameters they have. So, so basically, once someone uploaded his add-on to NPM, what he has to submit is this descriptor. A descriptor is just the state JSON object, which you can see over here, with various fields, which I'll go over in a second. So the first thing I'm going to do, just so it's comfortable to work, I'm just going to create a new text file in my project. And we're going to call it descriptor. JSON. Now, we have a pretty extensive documentation about the different fields for a descriptor and what they mean. But just to get started, I'm just going to copy and paste the example descriptor, and then I'll change it to suit my needs. So let's just copy it into here. Okay. All right. So at this point, I want to go and start creating my descriptor. So the first field I see here is the face, and the face is basically just an image which will appear next to the add-on in Primo Studio. So just going to leave it as it is. The notes field is a brief description of what this add-on does. So let's just write something. So second. All right. And this thing over here obviously describes who published this add-on. So Alan Jones. The what field is just basically the title of the add-on. So say report a bug. Now this field is a link to the GitHub. So I'm just going to use Alan's GitHub as a link. And the NPM ID, this is really the important one because this tells Primo Studio where to find this in NPM. So we decided to call this report bug Primo Studio. And the important thing is not to use the camel case version, but to use the hyphen case or whatever you want to call it version. So convert this quickly. All right. Next field is the version number, and this field will be used in the future in case I want to update this add-on, so I can submit a change to the version field. And that way Alan can check my update to see that it's up to par. And in this case, the version is the same one I wrote in the package.json. So right now we're at version 1. Now the hook field is also important because it tells Primo Studio on which hook we want to install this add-on. So I think it was decided that we're going to put this on the
Service links after.
Yeah, I always make this mistake. I erase the all right. So it's PRM service links after. Is that okay?
Yep.
All right. Okay. Okay. And the next field we have here is the config field. So the config field, what it does is it allows Primo Studio to open this this form when one wants to install this add-on, and the form will prompt the user to enter the various parameters. So in our case, we decided we were going to have a text parameter and a link-based parameter. So the first thing we see here is the multiple field, and this is in case we want to have the ability to open up to, let's say, 5 forms in this case. But in our case, we only want to have 1 link. So we're only going to decide we want to have 1 form. The next field is the form field, and this basically defines what field we're going to see in the form in Primo Studio. So first one we have is a text field. And if I just define the key, then the text next to the field in the form is going to be the same as the key. All right. And the key is obviously how you would access this parameter when you're writing your code, as we did before. And just as an example, let's create the second field. Let's have the text different than the key. So I'm just going to erase all of these. this one, and this one. And let me just remember what was the key we used. So we decided we're going to call it link base. So the key is going to be link base. And let's say I wanted the label to say link base, but with the space in between. So let's have it like that. And this should be our descriptor. Okay, so once we have this thing ready, we're going to copy all of this. We're going to go back to the Primo Studio repo. And this is basically how Alan and his team will control what comes into Primo Studio, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a pull request in order to change the features JSON file. So the important thing is to submit these requests on the submit here branch. The master branch is the branch from which Primo Studio gets the final features JSON. And now I'm going to hit fork. Okay. So right now I created a fork for this project. I'm going to go back to the submit here branch because it changed back to master. And I'm just going to edit the features JSON file and add my descriptor. So edit this file. And I'm just going to add it at the end of the list. We're not going to forget this because Alan's going to get mad if we forget this. Okay, and we're just going to paste our descriptor down here. And we're just going to write a quick comment about our changes to the features JSON. So add report a bug add-on. Okay, and you should write something more descriptive. I'm just going to write something quick. Okay. And commit my changes. Okay. And at this point, I'm going to go back to the original repo. And I'm going to create a pull request. So all right. And we should see our changes. All right, so all we did was really add this descriptor down here. Okay. And we're going to create a pull request. So at this point, Alan and his team should get a notification that they're waiting a pull request for the features JSON. And one second. Did you get my pull request, Alan?
I did. Hold on just a second. And while this is going on, we're basically reviewing the request. And just waiting for everything to, hold on a second. While this is going on, we're actually taking it through a process where we're going through our branches to check. Just a second. This is on. Sorry, this is taking so long. And do you want to take them to Primo Studio now? Joel?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, okay. So what we're going to do now is open up Primo Studio. So Primo Studio. Sorry about that. Okay. And I'm just going to use the Primo demo environment for this one. So let's start it up like this.
It took a few minutes for GitHub to update.
All right. Okay, so once the UI starts up, so we should go to the add-ons page, and we should see our new add-on at the bottom here. So here we go, report a bug. And we can see all of the various fields which we entered in the descriptor are now displayed over here with the image and the link to the GitHub page. And once we click add, it now opened this form in which we need to enter the parameters which we wanted to use. So text, let's write report a bug. Part of these stuff. And the link base, I guess, should be Google, right?
Yeah, sure.
All right. All right.
And then Q equals at the end, so you can actually the query.
Yeah, sorry. So Q equals like this.
Yep.
All right. And let's hit submit. Okay. So Primo Studio finished installing this add-on for me. And now it's refreshing. And let's just look for some record, and hopefully we'll be able to see the report a bug link in the full display page. So just a second. All right, let's open up the full view page.
Moment of truth.
Yep. Now we can scroll down. And there it is. All right. Okay. So we have report a bug. And if we click this link over here, it should take us to Google, and it's displaying the record ID. So, whew, it worked. Okay.
You're scaring me
right, and
surprised as I am, so.
Yeah, we're both surprised that it's all working. This is unprecedented. So, yeah, so basically, just to summarize, what me and Alan did was we took you through the process of creating a basic add-on, then transforming it to fit the format required by Primo Studio, then publishing it to NPM, and once it's published to NPM, we created this descriptor and added it to the Primo Studio repo, which is controlled by Alan and his team. And they then went into their process of merging it into the master branch which Primo Studio uses. So that's the entire flow basically of creating an add-on.
So one of the things that I'd like to thank is I'd like to thank Shaul and Yuval Kizelstein and Guy Ben-Parat and the folks over in the new UI team for actually facilitating what I think is a really useful way. And obviously, as we said, this is a beta, and I'm sure that people are going to have improvements and other types of things that they're going to have to this process, and I welcome to hear that so that we can expand upon Primo Studio. However, I do think it's a first of its kind type of interface where the community is actually able to put their customizations directly within the Primo interface. And we shouldn't just be using this to contribute code to others, but also to let other people know what functionality we actually have, and what it is that we're working on. So with that, I want to open up to questions and answers. There's a couple of questions that are coming in from YouTube, and if you have any other questions, then you can also use the Primo Slack channel. We'll be here all week, and so with that, I'll get to some of the questions. So Gautam asks the question: can the form have a dynamic number of fields, like letting users enter as many fields as values as possible?
Well, the answer for this would probably be yes and no. So as I was saying before, and you know what, actually for this question, I'm actually going to share my screen again. So 1 second. Okay, so you guys should now see Primo Studio, and let's take, for example, this first add-on over here. So once I click Add, I have this form, which is defined as we did before in the features JSON. But in this case, we used the the multiple field, and we set it to 5. So I should be able to add up to 5 of these forms over here. And the reason we do this was because, for example, this add-on, what it does, it adds links under the search bar. So I wanted it to be able to add up to 5 links, and obviously each one of these forms defines one of these links. So I could have one more, another one, another one, and up to 5. And each one of these forms defines a link. So in a way, the template of the form is predefined, but we could set it so we could have a dynamic number of forms. So I think that's the answer.
So, okay. I'm hoping that answered the question. Another question from Yuning. Can we start trying to use Primo Studio now? They see that it's in GitHub, but there's no installation guide.
Well, yeah, you could start using Primo Studio, and the thing about Primo Studio is it requires no installation. We're actually hosting it in Exlibris. We're hosting it on our cloud. So I think the whole point of Primo Studio was really because before Primo Studio we had the Primo Devon, which Alan used before to create the component. But the thing about the Primo Devon was it required everyone to install Node and install all these dependencies, and then obviously they had to learn how to write Angular. The point of Primo Studio is to connect those 5% of Primo users who actually go through the process of writing code and installing the Primo Devon, and the rest of the 95%. So we wanted to allow those people to easily customize their UI and to sort of tap into the power of those 5%. So I guess just to answer the question, yeah, Primo Studio doesn't require any installation. It's just sitting there on the cloud, and you could just I just put the URL in the Slack channel. You could just go in and play with it.
So, but one of the things that we are talking about is that the source code is made available so that the community can contribute to it. And
oh yeah.
So I think that's part of what they're talking about, Shaul, is not necessarily.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. So so Primo Studio in itself is an open source project, and I'm just gonna send the link for the GitHub repo, and you're all free to review the source code, and if you have any suggestions or ideas for Primo Studio, we're happy to hear them. And yeah, it's this is just the beginning for Primo Studio, and obviously we want to get the community involved in Primo Studio as a project. So I'm just gonna put the repo in the Slack channel. I hope everyone got it now. And yeah, I encourage you to go in and review it.
So Ulrich asks the question, how can I add custom features or code that are not in the features JSON file? In other words, how can I add custom fields that that are not covered within the spec of what's already there in the README?
I'm not sure I understand the question fully. Are we talking about the configuration parameter in the features JSON? I mean, the one that configures the form, or are we talking about installing add-ons which aren't in the features.json file?
No, what he's talking about, and Ulrich, correct me if I'm wrong. Hold on a second. Let me actually go. So I'm going to share my screen for a second. Can everybody see that?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. So here is the technical spec of the add-on for Primo Studio. And I think what he's asking, and I could be wrong, if he wants to put a value here that isn't currently accommodated, is that something that, how would he do that?
Well, I mean, he could put whatever values he wanted into the descriptor. It's just a matter if Primo Studio would parse those values or not.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, the only values which are parsed by Primo Studio are the ones defined in that document which you just showed. So, I guess the answer is no.
So just to be clear, then, sorry. What was it? The values here for now of what it is that I'm highlighting are fixed until we decide to add additional fields to the spec. One question that that's also a follow-up question to this is, what about dependencies? If your add-on requires a specific dependency that's outside of the package JSON file.
Okay, so regarding dependencies, I think this is a bit of an uncharted territories for us with Primo Studio, and that's I think this is some of the information we want to get out of this week. We want to understand what the problems are, and I guess dependencies might be an issue. We'll have to review that. But at the end of the day, if all of your code, including dependencies, is bundled into a custom.js file, and that's pretty much the whole add-on, then I guess it should work. I mean, you guys should definitely go out there and try doing that, and we'll see what happens.
So hold on just a second. One question that I'm sorry if B Woods asks, I'm sorry if I missed this, but will these add-ons be moderated somehow, or will we be under the assumption that anything we implement from the Primo Studio add-on is on our own heads? So I think it's fair to say that I'll take this, since this is more a community question than it is an Ex Libris question. The Primo add-ons come as is, or another way of saying that is at your own risk. So the enhancement coordinators who are also kind of managing the Primo Studio add-ons have a very minimal set of criteria that they're looking at. They don't want to necessarily be a judgment body to find out how good or judge how tight somebody's code is. It is something that we're looking to formalize a little bit more closely with the interoperability group. I think since this is such a new initiative, this is something that we're going to kind of evolve as we go along. Feature request. Gautam, we're already ahead of you. Can you add the number of downloads and maybe stats for all add-ons?
Yeah.
We already started looking at this within the NPM registry to see. Oh, stars, not stats. Excellent question. These are the types of things this is the type of feedback that we're looking for this week. And if you can put it in the Slack channel, we'll make sure to have a discussion with how this gets into Primo Studio's enhancement. So let's see. Jeff Peterson also says there are form properties. Okay. So with that, I think that this is a great kickoff. If anybody has questions or they want to follow up, I want to thank you for the hour and 20 minutes you gave to this, and appreciate the time. And hope to hear from you later on this week. Thanks, everybody. And
thank you.
We'll see you in Slack.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you very much.